I need somebody to make a video essay about the cultural influence of the Vine boom. There's really no reason for why I should still be alive today. I don't know how it's lasted this long. It's like a decade plus. And the crazy part is it's not even having like a comeback. It just never left. I'm just saying I'd like to see a 30-minute video of someone explaining the lore and influence of the Vine boom today. I think it would be pretty cool.
Here. November 7th, 2012, an industrial sound effects pack is uploaded to YouTube wherein the iconic sound can be heard within the first 2 seconds. King Batch was the first to make a Vine with it in April 10th of 2014, and from there it's remained relevant in social media ever since. Here's the real question. Why? Actually, scratch that. How? There are a number of things that can make a joke that was once funny now unfunny. According to Reddit, some of those reasons include being overused, being told by a person who themselves is not funny, interrupting somebody else to say it, being an obvious punchline, being childish, or being absolutely random. The Vine boom is all of those things, and it is still funny. Why? If you laughed at that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We have to understand what it is that makes something funny, which ironically is not necessarily a fun thing to do.
E.B. White says, analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Few people are interested, and the frog dies of it.
But although humor can seem completely nonsensical and arbitrary, there is a beautiful, almost scientific consistency to it. And if you examine it closely, it reveals much about the thinking of an entire generation and society. I just want to say before we get started though, I know this isn't important. This is a sound effect from 11 years ago, but you did decide to click on this video. You chose this. Let's proceed. Comedy is pretty simple. It's mostly two things. One, be relatable, and two, disrupt expectations while remaining logically satisfying.
I got this ring off Amazon.
But that takes more skill than we may realize. For example, if I came up to you and told you I had a hilarious joke, and then you just heard me say, okay, so there's this one time I was walking on the street, and then I got picked up by a spaceship, and the spaceship, it flew me to Mars, and we went to Mars, and then I came back, and I flew the spaceship, and I came back before my parents knew I was gone. But the thing is, if I ever did that to any of you, you'd have my full permission to slap me while pointing at me and calling me various names. And this is why children are not funny. Disrupting expectation, that's easy. Doing so while remaining logically consistent is not. For this reason, there are many methods in comedy for logically establishing expectations and then breaking them in a satisfying and funny way. Rule of three, three-man structure, straight manning, it's all about setting up expectations and then breaking them by shifting the perspective on the audience. So the question is, what's the disruptor? What's the perspective change that's going to make your audience laugh? Well, that often depends on who your audience is, and that's where relatability comes in. Many jokes often have to do with the context and background knowledge of your audience. If it's something they can't relate to, they're not gonna find it as funny. And this is why so many jokes age, because they're so deeply baked into the culture and time period from which they were birthed. For example, in your lifetime, do you think you will ever again laugh at a pandemic joke? And yet just 5 years ago, yes, the pandemic was 5 years ago, let's mourn that for a minute. And just a few short years ago, when people were calling it everything but a pandemic, a panorama, a panini, a Panda Express, we ate it up. It was a different time, and it was a different culture. And era and culture-specific jokes do not relate to outsiders. Now, I'm not saying that late-night shows are necessarily the pinnacle of comedy, but if you look at a monologue from 20 years ago, or from a foreign country, you wouldn't relate to it. Even if you understood the words that are being said, it's just not something that you feel, you know? These aren't events that you have experienced or were a part of, and so the jokes about them, they just don't land the same for you. So if a joke is inextricably tied to these things, it won't last for very long, nor will it travel very far. And that's an interesting task. What joke is able to be funny while transcending things like language, culture, context, and time? They need to be timeless, something that everybody can appeal to. They need to be fundamentally funny. They need to be physical humor. Because everyone on Earth has bodies, and we always will. So jokes centered around purely physical sensations will always be able to be related to. For example, take the following two vines. If you have immigrant parents like I do, which one of these is going to be easier to explain to them?
Road work ahead? Yeah, I sure hope it does.
No, so guys, it's really funny. So what happened is that so the sign says road work ahead, indicating that there's construction going on up ahead. But the guy, he read it like road work ahead, as if it's confirmation that it'll continue to be operational a few miles ahead. And it's a misunderstanding. You get it from the intonation and the pace at which he says his words. It's really funny. Do you get it? Compare that to look at man, fall funny. It just works. And I think this is why America's Funniest Home Videos has been on the air for as long as it has. It's a show that's 90% just people falling, and it was on television for 30 years. So jokes that rely on the least amount of cultural context and relate to physical sensations last the longest and go the farthest, giving us classic jokes centered around falling down, bad smells, physical pain, and of course, funny sounds. But in addition to being fundamentally funny, the Vine boom also serves a very functional purpose. In a TikTok video essay, didn't know that was a thing, Kokomoko, that's hard to say. Kokomoko made a very good point about how the Vine boom serves as a sort of modern day laugh track, indicating to the audience that something funny has just happened and you should be laughing. On top of this, she made a really interesting observation that due to the sound's repetitive nature, it has an almost hypnotic effect, almost like slot machines at a casino. As we all know, TikTok is known for the scroll, dopamine, repeat loop that can get us sucked in for literally hours. The boom serves as a type of stimulus to kind of keep that loop going, except now it's boom, dopamine, hit, repeat. Because sound is a more effective disruptor when compared to all the other senses that can be replicated in video. For example, I can change the screen right now, and that may surprise a bunch of people, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to give you like a jolt. Which one of those were you more shocked by? Yeah, audio is better for that. And so in doing the boom, dopamine, repeat loop, it continues the loop that the user is familiar with without actually leaving the video, so it kind of gives the creator just a little bit more watch time. But speaking to the sound's longevity and being able to last for over a decade, there's this really interesting book called Residual Media that kind of talks about how old media is able to survive in modern society. So, full transparency, the book costs $28. No. So instead, I opted to read an article that was summarizing the book. That article was really confusing because it was written by a doctoral student in California, and so I copy and pasted the article into ChatGPT and asked it to summarize it there. I say all of that to say this may not be the most accurate retelling of the book's contents, but it's what we're working with. Let's move on. So it went book, summary article, ChatGPT summarizing the summary article. That's not good. From what I understood, at least in part, old media doesn't really die. It's just that new media keeps innovating on the media that's here currently. I talked about this before in my sequels video. Everything is a derivative of something, and the same is true for humor. Something can only be considered truly obsolete when all of its functions and societal value have been replaced and improved upon by a newer innovation. For example, think about this. Have you ever wondered how people used to get up early for jobs before alarm clocks were invented? They would pay a guy with a long stick to knock on your window at 7 a.m. That's how, I'm not joking, that was a job. They were literally called knocker-uppers. Yes, this is a real thing, look it up. Now, have you seen one of these guys today? I would really hope not, because alarm clocks are free. They're everywhere. They're on every device ever made, and usually for no money. And so because their job and everything about it could be completely replaced by a much more convenient innovation, their jobs were rendered obsolete. But take something like physical mail. Even though objectively email is faster, cheaper, and more convenient, it will never fully replace it. Why? Because no matter how efficient email is, it can never replace the touch of physical mail. I'm not even talking about bills and like court dates and all the important stuff. I'm just talking about handwritten letters. It's not the same vibe. Like, yes, hypothetically, could a friend write you an email and send it to you 100 times faster and get the same words across? Yes. But if they sent you a handwritten letter with imperfections in the paper crease, isn't that just sweet, man? Let me tell you something right now. If a woman ever wrote me a handwritten letter in the mail, I would fold on the spot immediately. It would be devastating. So the boom, being such a convenient tool for online humor, is so useful and so irreplaceable that other innovations could never really take away all its uses, and so it's still useful today. However, while all of that is well and good, it means absolutely nothing if the joke cannot get past the one hurdle that nearly no other joke is able to clear. Now, as we all know, everything millennials do is corny, bad, and also not good. There are very few things that millennials do that have been able to successfully escape the mockery and scrutiny of Generation Z. That being the case, make no mistake, dear viewer, it is no easy feat for a joke to so successfully pass from the millennial generation to the next. This is a fine-tuned process that the joke must endure. Many jokes have tried, failed, and been lost to the stream of time. But ever so often, just once or twice in an entire generation, is a joke able to withstand the fire and emerge everlasting. This is a task that should not have been possible. These generations are diametrically opposed, and for two key reasons. Something I've noticed in my research is that in millennial humor, at least online, it has a fatal flaw. The idea that anyone can be funny. From what I've observed in their media, humor is seen less as a craft and more as a transaction. If I say doggo, puppers, I did a thing, relate myself to a potato, and of course play a silly overdramatic boom sound effect, these are things that we all agree are funny. I did them. Laugh, please. The presence of the object is the joke, and that's what makes it so easy to implement. And because it's so easy to implement, it so quickly gets overused and annoying. This type of comedy is lazy, and I think in stark contrast with Gen Z humor. To them, humor is treated more like a skill, or a sport even. It's not enough to simply reference something that's agreed to be funny. You gotta find a spin, an angle, you have to modernize it, adapt it, do something to be different. It's not enough to simply repeat the same joke over and over. That gets boring so quickly. You have to find a new angle, so you gotta be creative and really abstract with it. And this way, I think it makes the generation a lot more closer to traditional forms of comedy like stand-up. Jokes are completely calculated and yet must come off completely effortless. And while we're on the topic of effort, the two generations have different approaches to this as well. To understand the divide between millennial and Gen Z, you have to understand each generation's interesting relationship to the internet. It's been said that although both generations use it, millennials were introduced to the internet. Gen Z was born with it. They don't remember a time without its influence, and it's shaped their attitude towards it. Millennials, however, perceive the internet as an addition to their lives. It's an extracurricular. It was a blank canvas that could be anything they wanted. They made funny skits, they yelled, they sang, they cried, they laughed, and they danced. To them, it was a paradise where you could be anything you wanted to be. But if you saw them acting like this in real life, you would probably run in terror. What is this? It was a landscape where they could frolic and be anything they wanted to be. But only on the internet though. Don't do this in real life, someone will harm you. This is not how normal people act in real life. And to them, that's fine, because the internet is not grounded in reality. They didn't want this to be real life. This was their escape from real life, so they could be as silly, quirky, and kooky as they wanted to be, completely removed from how human beings actually act. Now, this is a completely different approach from Gen Z. The internet personality is not a separate persona. It is their persona. The separation from real life to online life has been blurred beyond repair. From politics to your career to being shamed and shunned by an entire society, Gen Z views the internet not as an escape, but as an extension of real life. And this is why I think Gen Z finds most of millennial humor and general presence to be annoying, because what is this? As we discussed, millennials' ideology is that the internet should be a place where you can be whatever you want, completely removed from the real world. The result? They act like insane human beings. If you met a person like this in real life, you wouldn't be concerned? This approach of trying is very outdated, because by today's standards, we are doing everything we can to look like we're not trying. We're the generation that made nonchalant a relevant term again, and with it, we made a new word that'll probably be added to the dictionary within like 1 or 2 years. We're trying so hard to look like we're not trying. The internet is now an extension of real life, and as we all know, the coolest people in real life do things effortlessly. They're just like that, you know? Trying is probably the corniest thing you can do in modern humor. If you seem desperate to get a laugh, I can smell it on you, and it smells bad. And it's for that reason that not a soul in Gen Z would be caught dead trying to look funny by saying a funny phrase with a quirky face and a kooky sound effect in the background. This is the epitome of trying, and would earn you the roasting of 1,000 suns. However, there is one exception to this rule, and it's the final piece of our discussion. I did it as a bit, guys. I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I have written dozens of scripts for these videos over the years. I have never felt more confused, frustrated, and defeated by trying to explain the following concept. So if it's a little bit confusing to you, I apologize in advance. Irony has been a tool in humor for generations. The contrast between what I said and what I meant by what I said, when properly used, is enough to cause a disruption of expectations like we discussed earlier. As we also previously discussed, being sincere and acting like you care in many contexts is seen as corny, cringy millennial filth. However, similar to how making fun of children who were just a little bit different to us was considered hilarious in our school age years, so too making fun of these people on the internet is considered hilarious today. Look, I get that there's a difference between satire and commentary and straight up bullying. I understand that, but for the sake of this argument, we're gonna wrap it all into one thing because they all generally use some sort of irony. It is by no means uncommon for it to be a trend or even a single video in which many people are hoarding to it, trying to recreate it only in an effort to mock it. The joke being, it looks like I'm genuinely doing it, but you know that I'm not. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, people use irony all the time. That's not a young person thing. Well, let me ask you this. Are you sure about that? As my fellow YouTube colleagues will tell you, sure, irony has been played around with by other generations, but in modern times, it has been battle-tested, experimented with, and over-engineered for modern humor. There are exactly three fundamental things we must understand about irony before this discussion continues. In almost all cases of social media irony, there are actions, indicators, and context, and at least two of these three must contradict one another for it to be considered an ironic post. For example, imagine I was one of your closest, most supportive friends, and you asked me, hey, how do I look? And I responded with, oh, you look nice. See, there was no problem with that. That was sincere, no irony. But let's take the same scenario. Hey, how do I look? Oh, you look terrible. But see, in this case, my actions communicate one thing, that I think you look ugly, gross, disgusting, and bad. But there are several indicators that tell otherwise. Facial expressions, eye movements, intonation. You can tell that I don't actually mean what I'm saying. In addition to this, the context that I'm one of your close supportive friends is not lining up with what I said, again, of you being ugly, gross, bad, and disgusting. See, my actions contradict the indicators and the context. Therefore, this is ironic. But let's take it up a notch one more time. Hey, how do I look? You look awful. See here, my actions seem sincere and there are no visible indications to say otherwise. So why is it that you didn't immediately slap me in the face out of disrespect? Well, because there's still a contradiction with the context. I am your close supportive friend. I wouldn't actually say with such sincerity that I think you look awful. Therefore, my action contradicts the context. Out of these three responses, which one would you say is the funniest? If you're anything like me, it's option 3, because it seems so sincere. It's the biggest contradiction, it's the biggest disruption, therefore it is the funniest. So as we can see between scenarios 2 and 3, irony is more funny when there are fewer indicators that you are being ironic. This type of humor is common among the youth, and you may hear it referred to in other contexts as committing to the bit, wherein you're being ironic, but you're not clearly indicating that you're being ironic and are thus depending on others to have the context to know that you're being ironic. So whether you're following a trend that's been going on that week, or you've built your entire internet personality on making jokes like this, you're depending on other people to have the context that you're only doing this ironically as a joke. Let's try a slightly different scenario. Again, level 0, the context is we're good platonic friends who make jokes with each other and have known each other for years. Hey, do you like me? Yeah, but not like that. We're friends. Sincere actions, no irony detected, you genuinely feel this way. Okay, let's bump it up a notch. Level 1. Hey, do you like me? Oh yes, I'm hopelessly in love with you. Actions contradict indicators. There is a level of irony present here. The real meaning is that you do not feel this way. Cool, we all understand? Let's take it one level even beyond that. Hey, be honest, do you like me? Oh, what? You think me, your best friend of 6 years, I have a crush on you? Come on, man. I mean, sure, do we make each other laugh and do we finish each other's sentences and do I dream about holding your hand? Only a little bit. And do I have a ring on standby and matching his and her tombstones ready to go at any given moment? This is true, but that's anytime. That's ridiculous. What on earth was that, man? In that last scenario, my actions and indicators and context were all so convoluted and confusing that nothing was actually communicated there. I have no idea what that actually meant. In fact, I would go as far as to say that you were trying so hard to be ironic that you weren't being ironic at all. You meant exactly what you said or what you didn't say. Whatever, I think you like me. This is what's known as meta-irony, but I think it's more accurate to refer to it as the coward's irony, because it has a built-in ejector seat. The real meaning cannot be deduced from what they said. Again, nothing has really been communicated, because the goal of this was not to communicate a clear message, it was to test waters, kind of gauge the audience and see what their response is. If the response is good, then you can admit that you weren't being ironic at all, but if the response is bad, you hit the ejector seat and hit them with the, hey, I was just joking, man, it was a bit. What does all of this have to do with the Vine boom? Everything. Everything we've discussed so far are the core tenets of how this joke was able to do the impossible. Every piece coexisting in perfect harmony and implementing at the exact right time in order for a magnificent picture to appear. Level 0. Genuine, authentic use by Viners from 2014 to 2017. A clear example of millennials using the presence of an object as the punchline to a joke. Due to its popularity, it became synonymous with millennial humor, and due to the very nature of it being an online joke, it was done to death over and over and over again until it had reached a point of annoyance and disturbance among younger audiences. Now normally this is when we would expect a joke to die, but this is a key to easy humor. Ironic use. Level 1. Gen Z implements the sound as a mockery to their millennial counterparts, emphasizing its overuse. And as we discussed earlier, the fewer the indicators of irony, the funnier the irony is to those who have the context. But conversely, it is also all the more confusing to those who don't. I'm not actually using the sound, I'm just doing it ironically. But you are using the sound.
You would see a lot of vines pop up in these sorts of videos, which naturally would lead to the slow but certainly steady rebirth of the Vine boom sound effect, this time in more of an ironic fashion. It would get saturated, spammed, and overused to death, except this time, everyone sort of agreed that it was in much more of an ironic sense.
And in the internet age, overtold jokes are enemy number one, and so must be constantly added to, modernized, adapted, spinned, something to make it different, as abstract as it can go. These iterations get weird quick, and they're not all gold, but some of them are genuinely funny. You now find yourself laughing at these, but not for the reason you think. You may not have even realized it yet, but we've now entered level 2. Meta-irony. At this point, the irony of the joke has become so muddied that even those who once considered themselves to be inside on the joke now have no idea what's going on. Are the people still using it? Or are we still mocking them? Or are we genuinely using it now? And it's at this point that it causes a really weird existential crisis. Is this still a joke? I don't know what's happening right now. I want to use the sound to be ironically funny, but I think people are gonna make fun of me for using it, but I'm not using it. I'm mocking people who do use it. But maybe we do think it's funny. I'm not sure if it's ironically funny, if it's actually funny. If I'm going to be made fun of for using it, I want to be funny, but I don't want to look like I'm trying to be funny. I just don't know. The average user is now in a state that I like to call freefall. Not sure where in the meme cycle this joke really is, and being too afraid to make a move. Can you believe this is my job? I know, right? This is crazy. Generation is in a place where they don't know if their peers are actually using it or making fun of it while using it. They still want to be funny, they just are too afraid to try. But at this point, the audience is so confused that they essentially melt away. Public opinion can't hear you down here. They barely know what's going on up there. It's just you and the sound. That's it. Because you can no longer reliably depend on the opinion of others to decide if it's funny or not, you must decide for yourself. What do you think of it? Do you think this sound is inherently funny? Does it meet the requirements of an everlasting joke, transcending time, culture, language, and context? Was it to pass into the use of the next generation? The answer was yes. As dumb as this may sound, I think there is a lot to be learned from the history and cultural impact of the Vine boom. As a generation, we have been so determined to look as though we are not trying, to not seem sincere, in an effort to not be hurt, to maintain one's image. And for what? Maybe we've won the approval of strangers, but maybe we've lost out on something that would have genuinely made us happy, regardless of what others may have said. The Vine boom teaches us that if we allow ourselves to let go of the perception of others on ourselves and just enjoy what we genuinely think is funny, maybe that's the best joy there is. We can't know how long this sound will be with us. In a few short years, Gen Alpha will be the dominant online generation. It'll be up to them what happens to it. They'll have to decide if the sound is worthy from passing on from one generation to the next. No matter what happens to it in the future. Thank you, Vine Boom. for being with us as long as you have, and for teaching us to laugh, even if nobody else does.